My name is Lorraine. I'm 62 years old, and I never thought my own flesh and blood would betray me when I was at my most vulnerable. The fluorescent lights above my hospital bed buzzed like angry wasps as I slowly came back to consciousness. My throat felt like sandpaper, and every muscle in my body ached from the 3-hour surgery I'd just endured. The gallbladder removal had been necessary, the doctor said, after months of pain that kept me doubled over in the middle of the night. But as I blinked away the fog of anesthesia, something felt terribly wrong. Mrs. Patterson, a nurse with kind brown eyes, leaned over me, checking the monitors that beeped steadily beside my bed. "How are you feeling? The surgery went very well." I tried to speak, but only managed a croak. She handed me a cup of ice chips and I let them melt on my tongue before trying again. "Where's Marcus, my son?" The nurse's expression shifted slightly. "He was here earlier, but he had to step out to handle some paperwork. He said he'd be back soon." Paperwork. That word sent a chill down my spine that had nothing to do with the hospital's air conditioning. Marcus had been acting strange for weeks leading up to my surgery, asking odd questions about my finances, my insurance, my living situation. I chalked it up to concern for his mother. But now, lying in the sterile room with tubes in my arm, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was very wrong. The hours crawled by like molasses. Nurses came and went, checking my vitals, asking about my pain level, but no Marcus. I asked for my phone, but the nurse said my belongings were being held for safekeeping. When I pressed for details, she just smiled that practice hospital smile and changed the subject. It wasn't until the next morning that Dr. Hernandez came to see me. He was a thin man with salt and pepper hair and wire-rimmed glasses that he kept adjusting nervously as he approached my bed. "Good morning, Mrs. Patterson. I'm glad to see you're recovering well. Your son has been very attentive to your care." "Where is he? I haven't seen him since before the surgery." Dr. Hernandez consulted his clipboard, avoiding my eyes. "He's been coordinating your discharge and transfer arrangements. Very thorough young man. He wants to make sure you have the best possible care during your recovery." Transfer arrangements. The words hit me like a physical blow. Transfer to where? To Sunny Meadows Recovery Center. It's a beautiful facility, Mrs. Patterson. Your son felt it would be the best place for you to recuperate, given your age and the fact that you live alone. I struggled to sit up straighter, ignoring the sharp pain in my abdomen where they'd made the incisions. "I never agreed to go to any recovery center. I want to go home." "Doctor." Hernandez finally met my eyes, and I saw pity there that made my stomach clench. "Mrs. Patterson, your son has medical power of attorney. He's making these decisions in your best interest." Medical power of attorney. The document I'd signed years ago when Marcus first started pressuring me about getting my affairs in order. He'd made it sound so reasonable then. What if something happened to me? Wouldn't I want him to be able to make medical decisions? I trusted him completely. After all, he was my only child, my baby boy who I'd raised by myself after his father walked out when Marcus was just 8 years old. "I want to see that document," I said, my voice stronger now despite the growing dread in my chest. "That's really something you'd need to discuss with your son, Dr. Hernandez said, backing toward the door. "He should be here soon. The transport to Sunny Meadows is scheduled for this afternoon." After he left, I lay there staring at the ceiling tiles, counting the tiny holes in each square as I tried to process what was happening. Marcus had committed me to some facility without my consent. The son I'd worked double shifts to put through college, who I'd supported through his divorce, who I'd lent money to when his business was struggling. The same son who'd been asking increasingly pointed questions about my house, my savings account, my life insurance policy. A different nurse came in around noon, an older woman with silver hair pulled back in a tight bun. Her name tag read, Dorothy. "Time for your medication, honey," she said, holding out a small paper cup with pills. What are these for? I asked, examining the pills. I'd been managing fine with just the standard pain medication. Dorothy checked her chart. Anxiety and sleep aid. Your son requested them, said you've been having trouble with both since your husband passed. My husband died 12 years ago, I said slowly, and I've never taken anxiety medication in my life. Something flickered across Dorothy's face. She'd been a nurse long enough to recognize when something wasn't right. Let me double-check this order, she said, taking the cup back. I'll be right back. But she never came back. Instead, a younger nurse appeared an hour later with the same pills, along with a wheelchair and a cheerful announcement that my ride was here. I'm not going anywhere, I said firmly. I want to speak to my son first. Oh, he's downstairs handling the paperwork. He'll meet you at Sunny Meadows once you're settled in. I refused to get in that wheelchair. For 20 minutes, I sat on the edge of my hospital bed in my gown and socks, arms crossed, while various hospital staff tried to convince me to cooperate. Finally, a security guard appeared, a big man with kind eyes who looked like he'd rather be anywhere else. Mrs. Patterson, he said gently. I don't want to have to make this difficult, but the paperwork is all in order. Your son has legal authority to make these decisions for you. This is kidnapping, I said, but even as the words left my mouth, I knew how they sounded. A confused elderly woman, post-surgery, probably on medication, making wild accusations about her devoted son. The ride to Sunny Meadows felt like a funeral procession. I sat in the back of the medical transport van, watching my neighborhood disappear through the small window. We passed the grocery store where I'd shopped for 30 years, where the cashiers knew my name and asked about my garden. We passed the library where I volunteered reading to children every Thursday. We passed my church where I'd sung in the choir since Marcus was in high school. Sunny Meadows looked exactly like what it was, an expensive nursing home trying to disguise itself as something else. The lobby had fresh flowers and soft music, but I could smell the underlying scent of disinfectant and something else I couldn't quite identify. Despair, maybe. A woman in a business suit greeted me with an enthusiastic smile that never reached her eyes. Mrs. Patterson, I'm Jennifer Walsh, the admissions coordinator. Your son has told us so much about you. We're going to take excellent care of you. Where's my son? I asked, for what felt like the 100th time that day. He had to return to work, but he left very detailed instructions about your care. He's such a devoted son, arranging everything to make sure you have the best possible recovery. They wheeled me to a room that was nice enough, with a view of a carefully maintained garden, but it wasn't my room, with my photos and my books and my grandmother's quilt on the bed. This was a place where people came to wait. My roommate was a tiny woman named Gladys who seemed happy for the company. She'd been at Sunny Meadows for 6 months, she told me, ever since her daughter decided she couldn't live alone anymore. Same story as half the people here, Gladys said, her voice barely above a whisper. Kids get tired of worrying, so they warehouse us somewhere they can visit on Sundays and feel good about themselves. But I don't need to be here, I protested. I had minor surgery. I could have recovered at home just fine. Gladys gave me a look that was part sympathy, part knowing sadness. Honey, need has nothing to do with it. It's about what's convenient for them. That first night, I barely slept. Every sound was foreign, every smell wrong. I kept waiting for Marcus to walk through the door, to explain that there had been some terrible misunderstanding. Surely my son, the boy I'd read bedtime stories to, who I'd taught to ride a bike and helped with homework, wouldn't abandon me in this place. But morning came, and then another day, and still no Marcus. It was on the 3rd day that I met Helen, a woman about my age who'd been at Sunny Meadows for over a year. She had sharp blue eyes and silver hair that she kept perfectly styled, despite being in what was essentially a prison for old people. "You're the new one everyone's talking about," she said, settling into the chair across from me in the common room, "the one who got committed by her son." "I wasn't committed," I said quickly. "This is just temporary, until I recover from surgery." Helen raised an eyebrow. "That's what they all say at first. What surgery?" "Gallbladder removal, routine procedure." "And you couldn't recover at home because—" I opened my mouth to repeat what Marcus had told the doctors, then closed it again. Because why couldn't I recover at home? I lived in a small ranch house, everything on one level. I had neighbors who checked on me, friends from church who would have been happy to help. My surgery had been laparoscopic, minimally invasive. Most people went home the same day. "He said I needed professional care," I said weakly. "Professional care for what? Walking to the bathroom? Making yourself soup?" Helen's voice was gentle, but her words cut deep. "Honey, I hate to be the one to tell you this, but there's a reason your son put you here, and it's not your health." That afternoon, I called the main number for Sunny Meadows and asked to speak to someone about my stay. I was transferred 3 times before reaching someone who could help me. "Mrs. Patterson, according to our records, your son has paid for a 6-month stay with an option to extend," the administrator told me. He was very clear that this was a long-term care arrangement. 6 months. The room started spinning around me. "I want to see the paperwork," I managed to say. "That would be something your son would need to authorize, since he's your medical power of attorney." I hung up the phone with shaking hands. 6 months. Marcus had planned this, had arranged for me to be stuck in this place for half a year. But why? That evening, I called my neighbor, Mrs. Chen, who lived next door to me for 15 years. She was surprised to hear from me. "Lorraine, Marcus told us you'd had complications from your surgery and needed extended care. How are you feeling?" "What else did he tell you?" "Well, he asked if we'd seen anyone around your house, said he was worried about break-ins while you were away. Oh, and he hired a service to maintain your yard. Such a thoughtful boy." After I hung up, I sat in the stiff chair by my bed, staring out at the manicured garden. Marcus was maintaining my house, which meant he didn't want it to look abandoned. But why would he care about that, unless— The realization hit me like a physical blow. My house. My beautiful little house that I'd worked 30 years to pay off. The house where I'd raised Marcus, where every room held memories of birthdays and Christmases and quiet Sunday mornings. Marcus knew I'd never sell it willingly. But if I was declared incompetent, if I was stuck in a care facility, I thought about all those questions he'd been asking. About my finances, my insurance, whether I'd updated my will lately, about how expensive it was going to be if I ever needed long-term care, about how much my house was worth in the current market. My son wasn't trying to take care of me. He was trying to take care of himself. The next morning, I asked to use the phone to call Marcus directly. The nurse hesitated, then said I could make the call from the administrative office. Marcus answered on the 3rd ring, his voice cheerful and warm. "Mom, how are you feeling? I've been meaning to visit, but work has been crazy. I want to come home, Marcus." There was a pause. "Mom, we talked about this. You need professional care right now," the doctor said. "I spoke to Dr. Hernandez yesterday. He said my recovery is going perfectly, and I could have been discharged days ago." Another pause, longer this time. "Mom, I think the medication might be making you confused. Dr. Hernandez specifically recommended extended care. I want to see the power of attorney document." "Why would you need to see that? Mom, you're starting to worry me. This kind of paranoia can be a side effect of anesthesia in older patients." "Older patients." As if I was some doddering fool instead of a woman who'd managed her own finances, maintained her own home, and lived independently for over a decade since retiring from my job as a school secretary. I'm not confused, Marcus. I want to go home. We'll talk about it when you're feeling better. I love you, Mom. The line went dead. I sat in that sterile office, staring at the phone as the full scope of my son's betrayal became clear. He was going to keep me here, drugged and compliant, while he figured out how to get control of my assets. Maybe he'd have me declared incompetent eventually. Maybe he'd just wait for me to die in this place, isolated from everyone I knew and loved. But Marcus had made one crucial mistake. He'd underestimated his mother. I'd survived an abusive marriage, raised a child alone, worked 2 jobs to keep us afloat, and built a good life through sheer determination. I wasn't about to let my own son destroy everything I'd worked for. That afternoon, I asked Helen to introduce me to some of the other residents. It was time to learn exactly how places like Sunny Meadows operated, and more importantly, how to get out. Helen introduced me to Robert, a retired lawyer who'd been placed at Sunny Meadows by his nephew after a minor stroke. His mind was sharp as a tack, but his speech was slightly slurred, which his nephew had used as evidence that he needed full-time care. The key, Robert told me, speaking slowly but clearly, is understanding that medical power of attorney has limits. It's supposed to be used for medical decisions, not life decisions. If you can prove you're competent to make your own choices, you can revoke it. How do I prove that from in here? You need an independent medical evaluation, and you need someone on the outside who can advocate for you. That evening, I made a list of everyone I could call. My church friends, my neighbors, former colleagues from the school district. People who knew me, who could testify that I was perfectly capable of taking care of myself. I started with my friend Dorothy from church, who'd been my closest friend for 20 years. She was shocked to hear where I was. Lorraine, honey, when Marcus told us about your surgery complications, we all assumed you were in intensive care somewhere. Nobody knew you were in a nursing home. What exactly did he tell people? That you'd had severe complications, that you were very sick, that visitors weren't allowed yet. We've all been praying for you, sending cards to your house. Cards that Marcus was probably throwing away. I felt a surge of anger so strong it made my hands shake. Dorothy, I need your help. What I'm about to tell you is going to sound crazy, but I need you to listen. I told her everything. About waking up to find myself committed to Sunny Meadows, about the 6-month payment, about Marcus's questions regarding my finances. Dorothy listened without interrupting, and when I finished, there was a long silence. That son of a bitch, she finally said, and I'd never heard Dorothy swear before in all the years I'd known her. Lorraine, what do you need me to do? By the end of the week, I had a plan. Dorothy had contacted a lawyer who specialized in elder abuse cases. She'd also reached out to several of our mutual friends, who were all horrified to learn where I really was and what Marcus had done. The lawyer, a young woman named Sarah Rodriguez, came to see me the following Monday. She was probably Marcus's age, with dark hair pulled back in a professional bun and intelligent brown eyes that reminded me of my former students. Mrs. Patterson, I've reviewed your case, and I believe we have grounds to challenge your son's actions. Medical power of attorney doesn't give him the right to commit you to long-term care if you're mentally competent and don't require it medically. How do we prove I'm competent? We start with an independent psychiatric evaluation. I've arranged for Dr. Martinez to see you tomorrow. He's a geriatric psychiatrist who specializes in cases like yours. Cases like mine? Sarah's expression hardened. Financial abuse by adult children. It's more common than you'd think, unfortunately. That night, I lay awake thinking about the little boy Marcus used to be. The child who would crawl into my bed during thunderstorms, who brought me dandelions he'd picked from the yard, who cried when other kids teased him about not having a father. When had that sweet boy turned into a man who could betray his own mother for money? Dr. Martinez arrived the next afternoon, a kind-faced man with graying temples and a gentle manner. He spent 2 hours with me, asking questions about my life, my medical history, my current mental state. He had me solve simple math problems, remember lists of words, explain current events. "Mrs. Patterson," he said when we finished, "there is absolutely nothing wrong with your cognitive function. You're sharp, articulate, and fully capable of making your own decisions. I'll be submitting a report to that effect." 3 days later, Sarah returned with good news and bad news. The good news is that Dr. Martinez's evaluation supports our case. The bad news is that your son has hired his own lawyer and is fighting our petition. He's claiming that you're suffering from post-surgical dementia and that removing you from professional care would endanger your health. Post-surgical dementia? That's ridiculous. It's also rare and largely unsupported by medical evidence in cases like yours. But Marcus's lawyer is arguing that your desire to leave Sunny Meadows is itself evidence of impaired judgment. The legal battle stretched on for weeks. Marcus came to see me exactly once during that time, accompanied by his lawyer and the facility administrator. He looked uncomfortable, avoiding my eyes, as his lawyer asked me questions clearly designed to make me sound confused or incompetent. "Mrs. Patterson, do you understand why your son felt it was necessary to place you here?" "Because he wants access to my house and my money." Marcus flinched, but his lawyer pressed on. "That's a very serious accusation. Do you have any evidence to support it?" "The evidence is that I'm sitting here having this conversation instead of recovering at home like any normal person would after routine surgery." "But you understand that you're 62 years old, living alone, with no family nearby to help with your recovery." "I have friends, I have neighbors, I have a community of people who've known me for decades and would have been happy to help if Marcus had asked them instead of committing me to this place." After they left, Helen found me crying in my room. It was the first time I'd broken down since this whole nightmare began. "He looked at me like I was a stranger," I sobbed. "Like I was just some obstacle in his way." Helen sat on my bed and held my hand. "Honey, some people can rationalize anything if there's money involved. He's probably convinced himself he's doing the right thing. How can putting your own mother in a nursing home against her will ever be the right thing? Because he's not thinking of you as his mother anymore. You're a problem to be solved, an asset to be managed. It's easier for him if he stops seeing you as a person." Those words haunted me through the long nights that followed. Had I failed somehow as a mother? Had I been too generous, too trusting? Or was this simply what Marcus had become as an adult, someone who saw relationships in terms of what he could get from them? The breakthrough came from an unexpected source. Mrs. Chen, my neighbor, had been keeping an eye on my house as Marcus requested. But being a naturally observant person, she'd also been keeping an eye on Marcus. "He's been there almost every day," she told Sarah during a phone call that Sarah then relayed to me. "Yesterday, I saw him loading boxes into his car. When I asked him about it, he said he was just organizing your belongings for when you came home. But Lorraine, those boxes looked heavy, like they were full of books or papers." My heart sank. Marcus was going through my things, probably looking for important documents, financial records, anything that might help him gain control of my assets. "There's more," Sarah continued. "Mrs. Chen also said she's seen a real estate agent at your house twice in the past week." A real estate agent. My worst fears were being confirmed. Marcus wasn't just trying to warehouse me at Sunny Meadows. He was actively planning to sell my home while I was trapped here. That evening, I called Mrs. Chen directly. "Lorraine, I'm so glad you called. I've been worried sick about you. Marcus told us you were improving, but that visits weren't allowed yet." "Mrs. Chen, I need you to do something for me, and it's going to sound strange." Anything, dear. I need you to call the police if you see Marcus at my house again. Or if you see that real estate agent. Tell them that my house is being burglarized. There was a pause. Lorraine, are you sure? I mean, he is your son. He's my son, but that house is still my property and I didn't give him permission to go through my things or to contact real estate agents. What he's doing is theft, even if he is family. Oh my goodness, Lorraine, what has he done to you? I told her everything, just as I'd told Dorothy. By the end of the conversation, Mrs. Chen was furious on my behalf and promising to document everything she saw. 2 days later, Sarah called with news that made my heart race. Mrs. Chen called the police yesterday when she saw Marcus loading more boxes into his car. When the officers approached him, he couldn't produce any written authorization from you to remove items from your house. They've opened an investigation for potential theft and elder abuse. Elder abuse. The words stung, but they were accurate. My own son was abusing me, manipulating the system to keep me imprisoned, while he systematically looted my life. The police investigation moved quickly. Within a week, they documented Marcus's unauthorized removal of items from my house, his contact with real estate agents without my consent, and his false statements to neighbors and friends about my condition. But the most damning evidence came from Sunny Meadows itself. Sarah had subpoenaed their records and discovered that Marcus had initially inquired about placing me there 6 months before my surgery. He'd been planning this for half a year, waiting for an opportunity. The hearing to restore my rights was scheduled for a Thursday morning in late October. I wore the nicest clothes Dorothy had brought me from home, and I tried to project confidence even though my hands were shaking. Marcus sat across the courtroom with his lawyer, still not meeting my eyes. He looked older somehow, worn down by the stress of fighting his own mother in court. Judge Williams was a woman about my age, with steel gray hair and no-nonsense demeanor. She'd clearly read all the documentation carefully. "Mr. Patterson," she said, addressing Marcus directly, "can you explain to me why you felt it necessary to place your mother in long-term care after what was, by all medical accounts, a routine and successful surgery?" Marcus's lawyer whispered something to him before he answered. "Your Honor, I was concerned about my mother's ability to care for herself. She's getting older, and living alone seemed risky. Did you discuss these concerns with your mother before making this decision?" "I tried to, but she can be stubborn about accepting help." Judge Williams turned to me. "Mrs. Patterson, did your son express specific concerns about your living situation before your surgery?" "No, Your Honor. He asked general questions about my finances and my house, but he never said he thought I couldn't live independently. If he had, we could have discussed options. Instead, he waited until I was unconscious from surgery to commit me to a facility against my will." "And how do you feel about your son's claim that you need professional care?" I took a deep breath. "Your Honor, I've been living independently for 12 years since my husband died. I maintain my own home, manage my own finances, volunteer in my community, and have never given anyone reason to believe I can't take care of myself. The only reason I'm in a nursing home is because my son used his medical power of attorney to override my wishes while I was vulnerable." Judge Williams spent several minutes reviewing the psychiatric evaluation, the medical records, and the police reports. Finally, she looked up. "Mr. Patterson, medical power of attorney is intended to allow family members to make medical decisions when a patient cannot do so themselves. It is not intended to give you control over your mother's living situation when she is mentally competent and medically stable." She turned to address the courtroom. "The evidence clearly shows that Mrs. Patterson is fully capable of making her own decisions. The psychiatric evaluation confirms her cognitive competence, and her medical records show no complications that would require extended care. Furthermore, the investigation has revealed that Ms. Patterson may have had financial motivations for his actions. Marcus's face went pale. I am hereby restoring Mrs. Patterson's right to make her own medical and personal decisions effective immediately. The medical power of attorney is revoked, and Mrs. Patterson is free to leave Sunny Meadows whenever she chooses. I felt tears streaming down my face, but for the first time in weeks, they were tears of relief rather than despair. Judge Williams wasn't finished. Mr. Patterson, you should be aware that the district attorney's office is reviewing this case for potential charges of elder abuse and theft. I strongly suggest you cooperate fully with their investigation. As we left the courtroom, Marcus finally approached me. His face was flushed, and his hands were shaking. Mom, I was just trying to make sure you were safe. I looked at my son, this man I'd raised and loved and sacrificed for, and felt nothing but sadness. No, Marcus, you were trying to make sure you were safe, financially safe, and you were willing to destroy your own mother to do it. It wasn't like that, I never meant. You meant every bit of it. You planned it for months. You lied to my friends. You went through my house without permission. You contacted real estate agents behind my back. You treated me like I was already dead. Marcus opened his mouth to argue, but no words came out. For the first time, he seemed to understand the full scope of what he'd done. I hope it was worth it, I said quietly, because you've lost your mother over it. I walked away from him then, my arm linked with Dorothy's, heading toward the car that would finally take me home. But even as we drove through the familiar streets of my neighborhood, I knew this wasn't really over. There were still legal battles ahead, still decisions to make about my future and my relationship with my son. Most importantly, there were changes I needed to make to ensure this could never happen to me again. As we pulled into my driveway, I saw Mrs. Chen waiting on her porch with a big smile and a plate of her famous cookies. Other neighbors emerged from their houses, people who'd been worried about me and angry on my behalf when they learned the truth. For the first time in weeks, I felt like I was truly home, but I also knew that the woman who'd entered that hospital for surgery was gone forever. In her place was someone harder, more cautious, someone who'd learned that even the people you love most can betray you when money is involved. The real question now was what I was going to do about it. Walking through my front door felt like stepping back into my own life after being trapped in someone else's nightmare. The familiar scent of my lavender potpourri mixed with the slight mustiness that comes from a house being closed up too long. Everything looked the same, yet somehow different, as if I was seeing it all through new eyes. Dorothy helped me settle back in, bustling around making tea and opening windows to let in fresh air. Mrs. Chen had stocked my refrigerator with essentials, and there was a stack of cards and letters from church friends on my kitchen table. The outpouring of support was overwhelming, but it also highlighted how isolated Marcus had tried to make me. That first night home, I barely slept. Every creak of the house settling made me wonder if Marcus might show up, demanding to know why I was being so difficult or trying to convince me that he'd acted out of love. But morning came peacefully, with sunlight streaming through my bedroom curtains and birds singing in the oak tree outside my window. I made myself a proper breakfast for the first time in weeks, scrambling eggs in my own skillet and brewing coffee in my own pot. Such simple pleasures, but they felt precious after weeks of institutional food served on plastic trays. Sarah Rodriguez called while I was finishing my second cup of coffee. Lorraine, how are you settling in? It's wonderful to be home, but I keep looking over my shoulder, waiting for the other shoe to drop. That's understandable. I have some updates that might help you feel more secure. First, the district attorney has decided to pursue charges against Marcus for elder abuse and theft. Second, we need to talk about protecting your assets going forward. My stomach clenched. What kind of charges? Financial exploitation of an elderly person, which is a felony in this state. also theft for removing your belongings without consent, and potentially fraud for the false statements he made to medical professionals. The thought of my son facing criminal charges made me feel sick, but I also knew he'd brought this on himself. What happens next? There will be a criminal trial, separate from the civil case we might pursue to recover your stolen property and damages. But Lorraine, we also need to talk about your will and your estate planning. If Marcus was willing to commit you to a nursing home for financial gain, he might try other tactics. That afternoon, Sarah came to my house with a briefcase full of legal documents. We sat at my kitchen table, the same table where I'd helped Marcus with his homework 30 years ago, and discussed how to protect myself from my own son. The most important thing is updating your will, Sarah explained. Right now, as your only child, Marcus stands to inherit everything. Given his recent actions, you might want to reconsider that arrangement. I stared out my kitchen window at the garden I'd tended for 15 years. Marcus used to help me plant tomatoes when he was young, getting dirt under his fingernails and asking endless questions about how things grew. I never thought I'd have to protect my assets from my own child, I said quietly. Unfortunately, it's more common than you'd think. Adult children sometimes view their parents' assets as their inheritance while the parents are still alive. They get impatient or they face financial pressures of their own. Marcus did mention his business was struggling again. That might explain the timing. Lorraine, you don't have to cut him out entirely if you don't want to, but you should definitely add conditions and protections. We spent the next 2 hours going through my finances and assets. The house was worth about $250,000, fully paid off. I had retirement savings of nearly $100,000, plus a small life insurance policy. Not a fortune, but enough to make someone desperate do terrible things. I want to change everything, I said finally. If Marcus was willing to lock me away to get his hands on my money, then he doesn't deserve to inherit it. Sarah nodded. We can do that, but I'd also recommend setting up some protections for you while you're still alive. A revocable trust, for instance, with someone you trust as successor trustee. Who would I trust? Marcus was the person I trusted most in the world. What about Dorothy? She's been incredibly supportive through this whole ordeal. Dorothy had been my closest friend for 20 years, the person I called when I needed advice or just wanted to talk. She'd proven her loyalty during the darkest period of my life. She would never betray me like this. Then let's make her your successor trustee and the executor of your will. That way, if anything happens to you, Marcus can't swoop in and take control. Over the next week, we drafted new legal documents that completely restructured my estate. The bulk of my assets would go to charity, with smaller bequests to Dorothy, Mrs. Chen, and several other friends who'd supported me. Marcus would receive exactly $1 along with a letter explaining why. Writing that letter was one of the hardest things I'd ever done. Marcus, by the time you read this, I'll be gone, and you'll have discovered that your inheritance is not what you expected. I'm leaving you $1, not out of spite, but as a reminder of what your greed cost both of us. When you committed me to Sunny Meadows against my will, you weren't just betraying your mother, you were destroying the relationship that should have been the most precious thing in both our lives. You were willing to warehouse me like an unwanted piece of furniture so you could get your hands on money that I worked my entire life to save. I raised you to be better than this. I sacrificed so much to give you opportunities, to make sure you had everything you needed to succeed in life. I never asked for anything in return except your love and respect. Instead, you saw me as an obstacle to your financial security. The money you wanted so badly is going to places where it can do some good. To the animal shelter where I volunteered, to the literacy program at the library, to the scholarship fund at your old elementary school. Maybe it will help other people in ways you never would have. I hope someday you understand what you lost when you decided money was more important than your mother. Lorraine. Signing that letter felt like signing Marcus's death certificate. The son I'd loved was gone, replaced by someone I didn't recognize. But it also felt like reclaiming my power, taking back control of my own life and legacy. The criminal case moved forward slowly. Marcus was arraigned on charges of elder abuse and theft, pleading not guilty through his lawyer. The local newspaper picked up the story, running a small article about a man accused of committing his mother to a nursing home for financial gain. I felt embarrassed by the publicity, but Sarah said it might help other families recognize similar warning signs. Marcus tried to contact me several times. He called my house, left voicemails that I deleted without listening to. He sent letters that I threw away unopened. He even showed up at my door one evening, but I watched him through the peephole and didn't answer. After 20 minutes of knocking and calling my name, he finally left. Mrs. Chen told me he'd been crying. "Maybe you should talk to him," she suggested gently. "He is still your son." "My son wouldn't have done what he did," I replied. "The person who committed me to that place is a stranger who happens to share my DNA." But her words haunted me. Late at night, lying in my own bed in my own house, I sometimes wondered if I was being too harsh. Had Marcus really intended to hurt me, or had he simply made a terrible mistake? Was there any part of the boy I'd raised still left in the man who'd betrayed me? The answer came 3 weeks later, when Dorothy discovered Marcus had been asking around the neighborhood about my daily routine. "Mrs. Henderson saw him parked across from your house yesterday morning," Dorothy told me over coffee. "He sat there for over an hour, just watching." A chill ran down my spine. Watching for what? I don't know, but it makes me nervous. Maybe he's planning to contest the will changes, or maybe he's looking for another opportunity to have you declared incompetent. That afternoon, I called Sarah. "We need a restraining order," I said without preamble. "Has he threatened you directly?" "He's stalking me, parking outside my house, asking neighbors about my schedule. After what he did before, I don't feel safe with him watching me." Sarah agreed to file for a protective order. The hearing was scheduled for the following week, and once again I found myself facing Marcus across a courtroom. This time, he looked terrible. He'd lost weight, his clothes were wrinkled, and there were dark circles under his eyes. When the judge asked him to explain his behavior, his voice was barely audible. "I just wanted to make sure she was okay," he said. "She won't talk to me, won't return my calls. She's my mother." "Mr. Patterson," Judge Williams said sternly, "you forfeited the right to express concern for your mother's welfare when you committed her to a nursing home against her will for financial gain. Sitting outside her house for hours is stalking, not caring." She granted the restraining order, prohibiting Marcus from coming within 500 feet of my house or contacting me in any way. As we left the courthouse, Marcus called out to me from across the parking lot. "Mom, please. I know I made mistakes, but I love you." I stopped walking and turned to face him. Sarah grabbed my arm, worried I might violate the restraining order by going closer, but I just needed to say one thing. "If you loved me," I called back, "you never would have done what you did." His face crumpled, and for a moment, I saw the little boy who used to run to me when he was hurt. But then I remembered waking up in that hospital bed, remembered the weeks of imprisonment, remembered the real estate agents at my house. The little boy was gone, and the man who remained had made his choices. The trial began in early December. I had to testify about my experience at Sunny Meadows, about discovering Marcus's plans to sell my house, about the fear and betrayal I'd felt. It was humiliating to have my personal business aired in public, but I also felt a sense of vindication as the evidence mounted against him. The prosecutor, a young man named David Kim, was thorough and compassionate. He walked the jury through Marcus's planning, showing how he'd contacted Sunny Meadows months before my surgery, how he'd used his power of attorney to override my wishes, how he'd lied to my friends and neighbors about my condition. This isn't a case about a son making a difficult decision for his mother's care, Mr. Kim told the jury. This is a case about financial exploitation, about a man who was willing to imprison his own mother to gain access to her assets. Marcus's lawyer tried to portray him as a concerned son who'd made an error in judgment, but the evidence was overwhelming. The jury deliberated for less than 2 hours before returning guilty verdicts on all charges. Judge Williams sentenced Marcus to 2 years in prison, with the possibility of parole after 18 months. She also ordered him to pay restitution for the costs of my legal fees and the emotional distress he'd caused. Mr. Patterson, she said before pronouncing sentence, elder abuse is one of the most despicable crimes in our society. When you exploit someone who should be able to trust you completely, you don't just harm them financially or physically, you destroy their faith in the people they love most. I felt no satisfaction watching my son being led away in handcuffs, only a deep, aching sadness for what we'd both lost. After the trial, I tried to rebuild my life. I returned to my volunteer work at the library, started attending church regularly again, and even began dating a widower named Frank, who I'd known for years. But the betrayal had changed something fundamental in me. I was more cautious now, more guarded, less willing to trust completely. The money Marcus had stolen was eventually returned, including items he'd taken from my house. But some things could never be replaced. Family photos he'd damaged while searching through boxes. My mother's jewelry that had been tangled and scattered. The sense of security I'd felt in my own home. Dorothy noticed the change in me. "You're different now," she said one afternoon as we sat in my garden, watching the roses I'd planted bloom for another spring. "How can I not be? The person I loved most in the world tried to steal my life from me. But you can't let him win by letting it destroy your happiness." "I'm not unhappy," I protested. "You're not happy either. You're careful, you're protected, but you're not truly living." Her words stayed with me as I tended my garden that evening. Was I letting Marcus's betrayal turn me into someone I didn't want to be? Someone so focused on protecting herself that she forgot how to enjoy life. That night, I did something I hadn't done since before my surgery. I called my great-niece Jenny, Marcus's cousin's daughter who lived across the country. We'd always been close, but I'd pulled back from family relationships after Marcus's betrayal, afraid of being hurt again. "Aunt Lorraine!" Jenny's voice was bright with surprise and pleasure. "I've been thinking about you so much. I heard about what happened with Marcus." We talked for over an hour, catching up on her job, her new boyfriend, her plans to visit the area next month. When she asked if she could stay with me instead of a hotel, I almost said no automatically. But then I stopped myself. "I'd love to have you stay here," I said, and meant it. After I hung up, I realized Dorothy was right. I couldn't let Marcus's actions poison every relationship in my life. There were still people worth trusting, still love worth risking heartbreak for. Marcus was released from prison after serving 16 months of his sentence. I heard about it through Mrs. Chen, who'd seen him at the grocery store. He looked older, she said, and very thin. He'd asked about me, but she'd told him she thought it was best if he stayed away. A week later, I found a letter in my mailbox. My first instinct was to throw it away unopened, as I had all his previous attempts at contact. But something made me hesitate. Maybe it was curiosity, or maybe it was the faint hope that prison had changed him somehow. "Mom, I know you probably won't read this, and I don't blame you if you throw it away. I know I have no right to ask for your forgiveness or even your attention. But I need to say some things, even if you never hear them. I was wrong, not just wrong in my methods, but wrong in my thinking. I convinced myself that I was protecting you, that putting you in Sunny Meadows was somehow for your own good. But that was a lie I told myself because the truth was too ugly to face. The truth is that I was scared. My business was failing. I was drowning in debt, and I saw your house and your savings as a solution to my problems. I told myself you were getting older anyway, that you'd probably need care eventually, so why not arrange it now when it could help us both? But there was no us both. There was just me, being selfish and cowardly, willing to sacrifice your freedom and dignity for my financial security. I turned you into a problem to be solved, instead of honoring you as the mother who gave me everything. Prison gave me a lot of time to think about the kind of man I'd become. The other inmates, when they heard what I was in for, they couldn't believe it. Even criminals have mothers they love. What I did was beyond their understanding, and that showed me how far I'd fallen. I'm not writing this to ask for forgiveness, because I know I don't deserve it. I'm writing to tell you that you were right to cut me out of your will, right to protect yourself from me, right to choose the people who truly care about you over the son who betrayed you. I hope you're happy, Mom. I hope Frank treats you well, and that your garden is beautiful this year. I hope you found peace in spite of what I put you through. I love you, even though I know my actions proved otherwise. I'll love you for the rest of my life, and I'll regret hurting you for just as long. Marcus. I read the letter 3 times, sitting at my kitchen table with tears streaming down my face. It was the first time Marcus had taken full responsibility for his actions. The first time he'd admitted that his concern for my welfare had been a lie he told himself. But was it too little? Too late? I thought about it for days, carrying the letter with me as I went about my daily routine. I showed it to Dorothy, to Sarah, to Frank. Everyone had opinions about whether Marcus's repentance was genuine, whether I should respond, whether forgiveness was possible after such a profound betrayal. In the end, the decision was mine alone. 2 weeks later, I sat down and wrote a response. Marcus, I read your letter. Thank you for finally telling the truth about what you did and why you did it. You're right that you don't deserve forgiveness. What you did to me was unforgivable. You didn't just steal my money or violate my trust. You stole weeks of my life, imprisoned me when I was vulnerable, and made me question everything I thought I knew about the person I loved most. But here's what I've learned in the months since your trial. Holding on to anger and hurt only gives you more power over my life. I refuse to let your betrayal define the rest of my years. So I forgive you, not because you've earned it, but because I need to let go of the poison you put in my heart. Forgiveness doesn't mean forgetting, and it doesn't mean trusting you again. It means choosing to be free from the burden of hating you. My will stands as written. The life I built will go to people and causes that bring good into the world, not to someone who tried to steal it from me while I was still living it. That's not punishment, it's natural consequences. I hope you rebuild your life into something you can be proud of. I hope you find a way to make amends through how you treat other people, since you can't make amends to me. Most of all, I hope you never put another family through what you put us through. This is the last communication we'll have. I wish you well, but from a distance. Lorraine. Sending that letter felt like closing a chapter of my life that had been left hanging open. I felt lighter somehow, as if I'd been carrying a weight I didn't realize was there. 3 months later, I heard that Marcus had moved to another state, starting over somewhere no one knew his story. Mrs. Chen said she'd heard he was working construction, living simply, trying to rebuild his life from the ground up. I felt a flicker of something that might have been pride. Maybe there was still some part of the boy I'd raised left in him after all. Frank and I were married on a beautiful Saturday in October, exactly 2 years after I'd been released from Sunny Meadows. It was a small ceremony in my backyard, with just our closest friends and family. Dorothy was my maid of honor, and Jenny flew in to walk me down the makeshift aisle. As I looked around at the faces of people who truly cared about me, people who had supported me through the darkest period of my life, I realized something important. Marcus's betrayal had nearly destroyed me, but it had also shown me who my real family was. Not the family I was born into or gave birth to, but the family I'd chosen and who had chosen me in return. The money I'd planned to leave to charity was still going to good causes, but I'd added a new beneficiary, a legal fund to help other elderly people fight financial abuse by family members. If my pain could prevent someone else from going through what I'd experienced, then maybe something good could come from it all. Jenny caught the bouquet at my wedding, laughing as she held the flowers high above her head. Later, as we danced at the reception, she whispered in my ear, "I'm so proud of you, Aunt Lorraine. You didn't let him win." She was right. Marcus had tried to steal my life, but he'd failed. I was still here, still fighting, still finding reasons to be happy. I'd survived his betrayal and built something beautiful from the ashes of our relationship. That night, as Frank and I sat on our porch swing watching the stars, I thought about the journey that had brought me to this moment. From the nightmare of waking up in that hospital to discover my son's betrayal, through the legal battles and the heartbreak, to this peaceful evening with the man I loved. "Any regrets?" Frank asked, as if reading my thoughts. I considered the question seriously. Did I regret having Marcus? Did I regret trusting him for so long? Did I regret the years of sacrifice I'd made to raise him? "No," I said finally. "Even with everything that happened, I don't regret loving him. I just regret that he couldn't love me the same way in return." Frank squeezed my hand. "His loss." "Yes," I agreed, looking up at the stars that had watched over me through every phase of my life. "His loss." The next morning, I woke up in my own bed, in my own house, next to the man I'd chosen to spend my remaining years with. I made breakfast in my own kitchen, tended my own garden, and planned my own day according to my own wishes. I'd won, not because I'd defeated Marcus in court or changed my will or even forgiven him. I'd won because I was still here, still living on my own terms, still believing that most people are good even after being betrayed by someone who should have been the best. Marcus had tried to write the ending to my story, putting me away somewhere convenient where I couldn't interfere with his plans, but I'd taken back the pen and written my own ending instead. And it was a happy one.